So that 18 years was really creating the type of economy that Jamaica has. And it was successful. If you check it out, by 2007, poverty was single digit in Jamaica. When Michael Manley took office in 1989, poverty was high. I don't remember the specific number, but it was over 20%. By the end of the 18 years, it was, I think, 9% and heading down. So the unemployment was single digit as well. Yes. The country had built up some decent reserves, yes, etc. But it was 18 years, and 18 years is a long time for one party. And the country said, look, try the GLP.
GDP was 113.8%.
Yeah, well, the debt to GDP ratio was in that region, correct. Now, GLP came in, there was a global financial crisis. Them couldn't manage that. They ran to the IMF. They signed an agreement with the IMF. The IMF was very generous with them and front-loading, in other words, put a lot of resources in place up front. But on the basis of certain commitments that the government made to restructure certain things so that, that the economy wouldn't get itself into this problematic that they found themselves in.
Right.
Them couldn't crack it. They abandoned the program. They didn't pass any tests. Jamaica was in the mud in terms of in the international financial community. The Bank of Jamaica had to be advancing money to the government, which it's not supposed to do, to pay bills. And they lost the election in 2011. And there was a whole doodles business as well and all of that. So we inherited a situation where the debt of the country had gone up to 147% of GDP, where the IMF program had collapsed. Jamaica had no access to international credit. It was a crisis. We were on the precipice of going over into a very difficult time where, God knows what would have happened if we hadn't pulled it together. And what the beauty of it was, Portia Simpson Miller, as Prime Minister, was somebody who the people of Jamaica felt had their best interests at heart. And they were prepared to undergo a difficult period of rectification of those problems, fixing those problems with her leadership. Because them say, well, since Andrew Wallace did say in 2011 election that it was bitter medicine was coming, I better them get it from Mama than from him. Right?
Yeah. So, Mama give medicine easier than Papa.
You don't know. So Peter Phillips, who was a skillful finance minister, managed the situation well, and we were able to pass every test. My role at that time as Minister of Justice was, I was in charge of the legislation of the government. I chaired the legislation committee of cabinet.
To restructure all these things that you just spoke to us about, moving out, getting the thing business friendly.
Exactly, and getting the tax system functioning right, so you had revenues to manage the debt problem.
So hold on a question.
Yeah.
This present, the whole tax system was fixed then.
Yeah.
And you was in charge of that.
Absolutely.
That's why the government now can collect so much revenue.
It has been a tremendous success. What happened? We restructured the tax system. We eliminated all the million of different types of incentives, created one, what we call omnibus tax incentive that any business can get. So, the employer tax credit, which means if you employ people and you pay your statutories, you get that as a credit against your income tax within certain limits. We also incentivized, we gave the tax deductions for investment in research and development, which hadn't been possible before. We introduced the production incentive where people can import production inputs that you can't buy here and you need to import without paying duty. So we created the tax environment that now exists. And we also dealt with the whole revenue collection side of things to streamline that. We introduced a new tax software in the tax system to make that more efficient. And let me tell you, the thing has worked tremendously well, because if you look at it without imposing any new tax types, the revenue of the country has grown way ahead of inflation over the period since then. In other words, if you look, and way ahead of economic growth as well.
But why you don't tell people that you do these things? And allow Nigel Clark to be claiming glory. You should be getting royalties. Look like we have an internet freeze. We're having a conversation with the leader of opposition and the president of the People's National Party, Mark Jefferson Golding. Obviously, with internet.
That was Mark Golding. And very interesting sort of interview done with the opposition leader, Mark Golding. He is the leader of the People's National Party in Jamaica. Now, when one listens to the opposition leader, that's Mark Golding, one would have thought that Jamaica is a prosperous country. And it's amazing to see how our politicians gaslight the population. And they manipulate the population with these glowing sentiments that we are doing well and that under their tenure, under their administration, Jamaica was prosperous. And that's what he was suggesting. Mark Golding, in this interview with this gentleman, suggested that during the PNP's reign, the 18-year reign of the PNP government, that Jamaica was prosperous, a prosperous country. Now, he mentioned nothing of the IMF, not the IMF, the FinSAC debacle and all that happened, that transpired within those years. He mentioned nothing, absolutely nothing. And it was very interesting, and I was hoping that the host would have questioned him more on the debt to GDP ratio because, he asked him, so, in 2007, when the PNP came, not the JLP came into power in 2007, that the GDP ratio, the debt to GDP ratio was hanging at around 113.5% of GDP. And that was high. That was a very high debt that the JLP actually inherited. But he was, he just ran over that, right? He didn't want to, explain. He did not want to extrapolate more on why that debt had occurred. Now, if you recall very clearly, and I did a presentation, I did a video in which I told you that in the 1990s, just before the FinSAC debacle, that Jamaica's debt, the debt to GDP ratio was in the low 70s. Could have been at around 71, 72% of GDP. And after the FinSAC debacle, it spiraled up to about over 100% of GDP. So the FinSAC debacle alone, under the PNP regime, caused our debt to have quadrupled. I mean, maybe it went 10 times more, but it really went up astronomically, dramatically. Our debt went up, increased dramatically under the PNP administration. But Minister Mark Golding would have us believe that the PNP regime was a prosperous regime that Jamaica went through, which is, of course, to the contrary, that is not true. Now, why is it that our politicians continue to disperse and to dispense lies, to diffuse lies to the Jamaican population? We tend to, just like the US has done, just like the Democratic Party has done, we tend to gaslight people with the news coming from officialdom. Whatever Wall Street says, whatever these gigantic corporations and their backers, their economists say, we believe that. But remember now that we have maybe three economies in any given country. We have the economy for the elites. We have the economy of the middle class. Well, generally speaking, the middle class and the elites tend to, because the middle class, not that they're wealthy, but some of them might be, but they tend to be on the side of the elites. Then you have the economy of the working class, those who are barely surviving, which in Jamaica's context, the majority, I would say 80%, over 80% of the people in Jamaica, could be more, are members of the working class. They're not middle class. Jamaica is not a middle class country. They say it's a middle income country, but it's not a middle class. It's not largely a middle class country. Even the United States is losing that status very rapidly. Okay? But the fact of the matter is that during the election, the recently held US election, people realized that Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party, under Joseph Biden also, were gaslighting the people. The people knew that they were not telling the truth about the economy. And how were they not telling the truth? Because people are not surviving. You have a lot of homelessness. You have a lot of people who are not able to buy basic groceries. Every day on the internet, people are complaining about the fact that they're not able and the cost that they have to pay for their groceries when they go to the supermarket. So how is it that they are living in this great economy, as Kamala Harris suggested? And now we have the leader of the opposition making the same claims, gaslighting the Jamaican people that the economy of Jamaica did exceptionally well under the PNP administration, which is a lie, right? The opposition leader is not speaking the truth. Now, he's suggesting that under the IMF, which is true that Golding did not really, pull through with the conditions that was imposed upon him. And for those of you who don't understand, that program was aborted, meaning that the IMF seemed to have canceled it. And that is why we were left to burn. In fact, in the Forbes newspaper, I understand that between 2010 and 11, when Jamaican had to be making, the Minister of Finance, was making a lot of trips to Washington, the question that was always asked when they went to Washington just before the deal was inked out, has Jamaica yet crashed? Has Jamaica crashed? Because that's what they were hoping would have happened. It seems to me that they really want us to crash for the other people in the world to understand that you do not disobey multilateral institutions, which Golding did. He challenged them, and for challenging them, not because he wanted to challenge them for his own self-gratification, but because he understood that the rigors of the policies, of the conditions would have been too much for Jamaica. But notice what he said. Notice what Minister Golding said, Mark Golding. He said that the policies of the IMF would have been so stringent that the IMF people decided that it would have been better to impose those austere economic policies under the People's National Party. Who was heading the party at the time? Portia Simpson Miller, because it would have been better if Mama P imposed those policies upon the people than Papa whomever, right? So possibly if Portia Simpson Miller was in power during the JLP administration, the time when the entire world was experiencing the financial meltdown, that Jamaicans would have accepted the austerity. They would not accept it under Bruce Golding, but they would have accepted it under Portia Simpson Miller. And of course, after Portia Simpson Miller left office in 2016, the JLP was able to just transition seamlessly because we had already been indoctrinated and manipulated, hypnotized that the bitter medicine was good for our economic diet, which it has not been good, because we're seeing the results that nothing really has happened. Our economy has really regressed. Well, they're suggesting that our economy has moved forward, but when you look at the lives of our people, you can see poverty, you see gross poverty. And every time you see newscasts coming from Jamaica and the journalists head to these communities, even in Kingston. And recently when they had the video of Kamala Harris's father's relatives who are in Brownstown, St. Anne, you could see the level of poverty in Brownstown. And Brownstown was once a middle-class community, was once a middle-class town. And you could see the deterioration of that community, of that small town, of a town that was once known for being a middle-class town, right? So you can see that Jamaica is not heading on the road, on a pathway of prosperity. It is to the contrary, that we have regressed, and we continue to regress because our politicians, they tell us that, of course, we are heading in the right direction. But what is happening? The rich, like Mark Golding, are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. That is what he's not saying to you. But look at how he's glorifying himself, that he went and he actually, made more efficient the tax administration, the tax office in Jamaica, and he implemented and he crafted laws that made the payment of taxes more efficient. And the way in which he spoke, you'd have thought that it's just easy to go to Jamaica now and start up a business because of the efficiency of taxes and how, and people would perhaps be encouraged to start up a business. But when you speak to people who go to Jamaica, including returning residents, they will let you know that it's one of the most difficult places to start up a small to medium-sized business. So that is, we don't understand really what the minister is talking about. What countries is he talking about? This is what we have to ask. But the minister, because he wants to, go to power, he wants to win the election, he has to lie to the Jamaican people. He has to lie bold-facedly to the Jamaican people, and people are going to buy it. The people who are PNP diehards, just like the Democratic people who were Democratic diehards in the United States, they voted for the Democratic Party, right? We'll vote for the Democratic Party until we die, just like we'll vote for the PNP until we die, or the JLP. And at the end of the day, both parties are doing the same thing. It's interesting to note that many people are sending me things about, this is what Trump is doing, and he's going to be, he's picking neocons. Well, both parties are the same, right? They are the same. I've been saying that on this channel, that both parties are the same. But we cannot give them 18 years as we did for the PNP party. We have to play the game with them and let them understand that even though we know what they're doing, but we have to play the game with our votes, just like they're playing the game with the economy. We've got to push them out as we do from time to time, maybe every 4 years or every 5 years. We can't just continue to vote for JLP or PNP and have them in office for 18 years, because that's time going to have lots of corruption and the economy is going to regress. So yes, give them a chance to do what they do and to participate in their corrupt activities, but we shall not give one party the freedom of just running roughshod over the constituents for a long period of time, right? We've got to think. But I thought I would share this with you because I thought that Minister Golding's comment about this prosperity, the supposed prosperity under the PNP administration, is false. It's mendacious. And he needs to rethink his position, and he needs to speak to working class Jamaicans, as Kamala Harris wasn't speaking to working class Jamaicans, and it costed her the election. Apart from the war in the Gaza area, the economy costed Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party the recently held election in the United States. If these governments, and I think that Mark Golding is not offering, just like Kamala Harris, at least Trump, in his being a populist, was offering. I'm not saying that he's going to honor what he says he has set out in his campaign, what he was campaigning on. I'm not saying that he's going to fulfill his promises, but at least he sympathized. He ran to his base instead of running away from his base. He ran to his base. What we are seeing in Jamaica is that both parties are running away from their base, which is the working class Jamaicans. And what did we say? That I would believe, I have not done any formal study, that over 80% of Jamaicans, if not 85% of Jamaicans, are working class people. So think about 85% of the country suffering, and only 15%, let us say we have 10% of the people who might be middle class, 8 to 10%, and they're surviving quite well, they're comfortable, and the next maybe 5% or 4% being of the upper echelon, right? The upper class. I don't think it's that high, but I'm trying to be nice here. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of people in the country are impoverished and are struggling to live from day to day. And yet still our politicians are still gaslighting. Yes, we're living. Yes, the economy is doing well. And because you're saying that, you should be able to find a job. That's what they're suggesting. When they come to you and say that the economy is doing well, inflation is down, they're telling you that you're the problem. because we have solved the basics and you have not done what you're supposed to do. You are not competent, you're not qualified, you're not educated, you might not be using your money wisely because inflation is down, so the grocery prices should not be that high. It's price gouging. All of those things are what we call gaslighting. And we've got to tell our politicians that we are beyond that. And they need now to come to us with things that are substantive and things that are practical, viable economic policies, because what they're telling us are things that indicate to us that they are living in a world of delusion, that their minds are, they're suffering from the mental delusional syndrome. And that is what we need to tell them. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you would like and share and subscribe. Remember to like the videos so the videos can be shared with as many people on the platform. All the best to you. See you then. Bye-bye.